$10,000, one weekend, and a deal nobody should have made. Emery was 31 years old and lived invisible until a mysterious CEO walked into her life with an absurd proposal: pretend to be his girlfriend for 2 days. She accepted the money, but what happened between them was too real to be faked. And time was running out. This story is going to move you in a way you didn't expect. But before I tell you, tell me here, what city and country are you watching from right now? Leave it in the comments. I love knowing where you're all following these stories from. Now take a deep breath, because what you're about to feel here is intense.
Emery Lawson was 31 years old and had a life that fit inside a small suitcase. She woke up at 6 in the morning, made coffee that was too strong, put on the moss green uniform from the pet shop, and walked down the same frozen street in Minneapolis, where the wind cut through skin and nobody looked anyone in the eye. She didn't mind that. In fact, she preferred it that way. Invisible, untouched, protected by the routine that kept her from feeling anything beyond the exhaustion necessary to sleep at night. 6 months ago, her mother had passed away, taking with her the last thread that still tied Emery to the world. Now, all that remained was work, silence, and the constant sensation of drifting without direction. But on that cold November afternoon, something was about to crack the surface. She was organizing bags of dog food when she heard the doorbell chime. She looked up just enough to register the figure of a tall man, dark suit, hair slightly tousled by the wind. He looked lost, as if he'd walked into the wrong place. Emery went back to work, expecting him to leave on his own. But he didn't leave. "Excuse me," he said, his voice firm but polite. She turned around, wiping her hands on her apron. "I need cat food. Something good. I don't know which one." She pointed to a shelf, explained the options with the efficiency of someone who'd repeated the same words for years. He thanked her, paid, and left. Simple as that. But when the door closed behind him, Emery realized something had shifted in the air, as if someone had opened a window in a room that had been closed for too long. The next day, he came back. Same time, same posture, but this time with a different excuse. He needed toys for the cat. Emery didn't question it. She helped him, bagged it, handed it over. He thanked her again, but this time he lingered a second longer before leaving. She pretended not to notice. On the third day, he showed up asking for recommendations on cat litter. Emery began to feel a strange discomfort, not fear, but something closer to awareness, a sensation she'd forgotten how to name. He was looking at her, not in a hurry, not with indifference, but with genuine curiosity, as if he were trying to figure out something she herself didn't know she was hiding. And that scared her more than any words could. Emery's life was made of safe repetitions. Wake up, work, go home, cook something tasteless, watch television without really watching, lie in bed and hope sleep would come before the memories did. She avoided long conversations, goodbyes that might mean something, questions that touched too deep. Since her mother's death, each day was a silent negotiation: survive without feeling, exist without living. She'd become an expert at it. But that man, with his inexplicable presence and his pointless requests, was starting to pierce through the armor she'd built so carefully. And Emery didn't know if she wanted him to stop or if it was already too late for that.
The fourth time he came in, there were no more plausible excuses. He simply stood near the counter, hands in his pockets, like someone who'd finally decided he wasn't going to pretend anymore. Emery felt her heart race, that automatic gesture of touching her own pulse with her thumb, checking if she was still there, present, real. She wanted to ask what he really wanted, but the words wouldn't come. He broke the silence first. "Do you always work alone?" The question was simple, but it carried a weight that Emery recognized immediately. Loneliness. She took a deep breath, trying to keep her voice steady. "Always." He nodded slowly, as if that answer confirmed something he already knew, and then, with a tired half-smile, he said quietly, "Me too." Those two words landed in Emery's chest like a stone thrown into a still lake. She hadn't expected recognition. She hadn't expected that someone like him, expensive suit, the posture of someone who commanded entire rooms, could understand what it was like to feel invisible. But there he was, standing in front of her, someone who seemed to carry the same emptiness wrapped in different clothes. Emery didn't know what to say, didn't know if she should say anything at all, so she just nodded, a gesture almost imperceptible, but one that said everything. "I see you." And for the first time in months, she felt like she was being seen too. What had been just another ordinary afternoon at work now felt like the beginning of something she didn't know if she wanted, but could no longer avoid. When he left that time, he took nothing with him but a "see you later" that sounded more like a promise than a goodbye. Emery stood behind the counter, listening to the sound of the bell still echoing through the empty store. She knew he would come back, and she also knew that when he did, she wouldn't be able to pretend anymore that it didn't mean anything. The perfect routine, the comfortable invisibility, the safe world she'd built, it was all starting to crumble. And the worst part? A small but insistent part of her wanted to let it crumble completely.
Emery spent the entire night thinking about that "see you later." She tossed and turned in bed, stared at the cracked ceiling of her tiny apartment, tried to convince herself she was overreacting. He was just a polite customer, nothing more. But when she arrived at the pet shop the next day and saw that same man standing on the sidewalk waiting for the store to open, her stomach twisted into a knot. He wasn't there for cat food. He wasn't there by chance. He was there for her. And that certainty left her paralyzed for a moment, the key trembling in the lock as she pretended not to have noticed his presence. He waited patiently, hands in the pockets of his dark coat, breath forming brief clouds in the frozen Minneapolis air. When she finally opened the door, he followed her inside in silence, as if he knew that hasty words might make her retreat. "I need to tell you something," he said, even before she turned on the lights. His voice was firm, but there was something vulnerable there, something he was holding carefully so it wouldn't fall. Emery turned slowly, still clutching her purse against her chest like a makeshift shield. "You don't know me," he continued, "but I feel like you understand something that nobody around me understands." She frowned, confused. He took a deep breath. "My name is Ethan Marshall. I run a pharmaceutical company. I have meetings all day, business dinners at night, people calling me constantly, but I live surrounded by loneliness." He paused, as if testing the weight of those words in his mouth. "And when I walked in here the first time, I saw in you the same thing I feel every day, that you're alone, even when there are people around."
Emery felt her chest tighten. Nobody had ever said that to her. Nobody had ever seen that in her. She wanted to deny it, wanted to say he was wrong, that she was fine, that she didn't need anyone. But the words wouldn't come, because he was right, completely right. And admitting that, even in silence, was like opening a door she'd locked 6 months ago, since the day she buried her mother without being able to say a real goodbye. Ethan took a step forward, but kept a respectful distance. "I didn't come here to bother you. I came because I feel like I can be honest with you. And that's rare." He swallowed hard. "I need someone who doesn't want anything from me. Someone who's not trying to fix me or save me. Someone who's just present." She finally found her voice, though it trembled. "Why me?" The question came out more like a whisper than a complete sentence. Ethan smiled to the side, a tired smile, the kind that comes from someone who's given up pretending. "Because you don't look at me the way everyone else does. You don't see the CEO, the last name, the money. You see, I don't know, maybe you just see a guy who buys way too much cat food for a cat that doesn't even exist." Emery blinked, surprised. "You don't have a cat?" He laughed quietly, shaking his head. "No, I just needed an excuse to come back." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was full of unspoken things, of mutual recognition, of two people who were tired of carrying everything alone and who suddenly had found someone who understood the weight.
Emery should have asked him to leave, should have said this was strange, inappropriate, that she wasn't interested, but she didn't say any of that, because for the first time in months, she didn't feel invisible, she felt seen, and that was both terrifying and liberating at the same time. Ethan noticed her hesitation and took a step back. "Sorry, I shouldn't have come like this, out of nowhere. He ran his hand through his hair, searching for the right words. "I have a proposal, and I know it's going to sound crazy, but hear me out, please." Emery crossed her arms, more for protection than out of distrust. "I'm listening." And something in that moment, in the way she said it, made Ethan realize that maybe, just maybe, she was as desperate for connection as he was. He started slowly, choosing each word like someone assembling a delicate puzzle. "My sister is getting married in 2 weeks. The whole family will be there. Press, friends, investors, and everyone expects me to show up with someone, to show that I'm okay, that I'm stable." He paused. "But I'm not okay, and everyone I know wants something from me. Money, influence, status. Nobody just wants to be with me." Emery felt a tightness in her chest. She knew that feeling, of being useful but not wanted, of being functional but not loved. Ethan continued, his voice lower now. "I need someone to go with me to the wedding. Pretend we're together, just one weekend. After that, we each go back to our own lives." He pulled his wallet from his pocket and placed a blank check on the counter between them. $10,000. You decide how much it's worth.
Emery looked at the check as if it were a trap. And maybe it was. But it was also a way out. A way to pay the overdue bills, to breathe a little, to have some time before the world came demanding again. She touched her own pulse with her thumb, that automatic gesture that reminded her she was still there, alive, present. Ethan noticed the gesture and, without thinking, reached his hand across the counter, lightly touching the back of her hand. "You don't have to answer now," he said gently, "but if you say yes, I promise you won't regret it." Emery looked up and met his eyes, tired, honest, full of a pain she recognized in her own reflection. And in that instant, she knew she'd already decided, even without fully understanding why. The drive started in silence. Emery got into Ethan's car with a small suitcase and her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. He drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the window, eyes fixed on the road cutting through Minneapolis toward the countryside, where the wedding would take place on a rural estate that looked like something out of a fairy tale. They didn't talk for the first 20 minutes. They just let the radio fill the space between them. Soft music that neither of them was really listening to. Emery looked out the window, watching the bare trees fly past, wondering if she'd completely lost her mind by agreeing to this. $10,000, one weekend, pretending something that didn't exist. Simple, right? But nothing about this felt simple, especially when Ethan finally broke the silence. "We need rules." She turned her face toward him, curious. "Rules?" Ethan nodded, his fingers drumming lightly on the wheel. "If we're going to do this, we need to be clear about what's real and what's acting. Otherwise, it gets complicated." Emery understood perfectly what he meant, because she felt it too, that dangerous tension that had been hanging in the air since the moment he touched her hand at the pet shop. "Okay," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "What kind of rules?" He took a deep breath, as if organizing his thoughts before speaking. "Rule number 1, this isn't real. It's an arrangement. 2 days, and then we each go back to our own lives." She nodded. "Rule number 2, no deep personal questions. You don't need to tell your whole life story, just the basics." He glanced at her. "Rule number 3, no feelings. Don't complicate it. Don't get attached." Emery should have felt relieved,
But strangely, those rules felt like cages.
They stopped at a roadside diner, needing a break before reaching their final destination. They sat at a table near the window with cups of hot coffee warming their cold hands. Ethan looked at her over his cup, and for the first time since they'd left, he seemed to really see her, not as a temporary solution, but as a person. "Have you been to a wedding before?" he asked, breaking his own rule number 2 without realizing it. Emery smiled to the side. "I went to one, years ago. My cousin's. I was 15 and wore this awful pink dress my mom picked out." She stopped, the memory of her mother cutting through her chest like a blade. Ethan noticed the shift in her face. "Your mom? Is she still alive?" Emery shook her head slowly. "She died 6 months ago. Alzheimer's." The word came out heavy, loaded with everything she couldn't say. Ethan didn't offer empty condolences. He just nodded, like someone recognizing a similar pain. "I'm losing someone too," he said, suddenly, his voice low, almost confessional. Emery looked up, surprised. Ethan stirred his coffee, staring at the dark liquid as if searching for courage there. "I have a diagnosis. Something serious. The doctors talk about aggressive treatment, but the chances aren't good." He finally looked at her. "Nobody knows, not my sister, not my family, because if they find out, everything changes. I become the poor guy, the sick one. The company goes into crisis. And I just want to live what I have left without people looking at me with pity." Emery felt the air leave her lungs. There he was, this powerful man who seemed to have everything under control and revealing that he was dying. And suddenly, the rules they had created seemed ridiculous, because how do you not feel something for someone who trusts you with their own mortality?
She reached her hand across the table, taking his without asking permission. He looked at her surprised, but didn't pull away. "I carry guilt," Emery said softly. "My mom died and I couldn't really say goodbye. She hadn't recognized me for months, but I kept staying there, hoping that one day she'd come back. And she never came back. And now I live with this feeling that I didn't do enough, that I should have been better." Her voice broke at the end, and a tear rolled down without warning. Ethan squeezed her hand tight, as if he could hold that pain before it fell. "You did enough," he said with a certainty that Emery didn't know where it came from. "Just by staying there, you did enough." And for the first time in months, Emery believed it, even if only for a second. When they arrived at the estate where the wedding would take place, reality came back with force. There were lights everywhere, white flowers decorating the gardens, elegant people circulating with champagne glasses. Ethan got out of the car, adjusted his jacket, and took a deep breath before opening the door for Emery. She stepped out slowly, feeling the weight of all the eyes that turned toward her. Ethan took her hand, interlacing their fingers naturally. "Remember the rules?" he whispered as they walked toward the entrance. Emery nodded, trying not to tremble. But when they entered, and Olivia, Ethan's sister, came running to hug him, Emery realized something. The rules were fragile, and she and Ethan were about to break them, one by one, until nothing remained but the naked truth. That night, when he introduced her as someone who makes me feel less alone, she knew it was already too late to turn back.
Dinner was long, full of forced conversations and polite smiles. Emery stayed by Ethan's side the whole time, playing the role of a loving girlfriend with an ease that frightened her. He touched her shoulder from time to time, leaned in to whisper something funny in her ear, looked at her as if she were the only person in the room. And maybe she was, because that night, when they were finally alone in the room they were sharing, 2 separate beds as agreed, Ethan didn't go to his bed. He stood near the window, looking at the starry sky, and said quietly, "I broke all the rules today." Emery approached slowly, standing beside him. "Me too." They looked at each other, and what happened next wasn't planned, wasn't part of the deal. They kissed, and in that kiss, all the rules crumbled like sandcastles swept away by the tide. Dawn arrived quietly, almost embarrassed.
Emery woke first, still wrapped in the messy sheets, feeling the weight of Ethan's body beside hers. They had slept together, not just physically, but in a way that went beyond any agreement or rule. She stared at the white ceiling of the room, listening to his breathing, trying to name what she felt. It wasn't regret, it was fear. Fear that this meant something she wouldn't be able to sustain. Fear that when the sun rose completely, everything they'd built that night would dissolve like mist. She slowly turned her head and found his eyes open, fixed on her, as if he too was trying to decipher what lay between them. Neither of them said anything, because any word could break the fragile balance that still remained, and maybe neither of them was ready to face the truth. Ethan was the first to get up, leaving the bed with careful, almost mechanical movements. He put on his wrinkled shirt, ran his hand through his hair, avoided looking directly at her. Emery sat up in bed, pulling the sheet to cover her shoulders, feeling a distance growing between them, even though they were in the same room. "We need to talk," she said, her voice hoarse with sleep and emotion. Ethan stopped near the window, his back to her, shoulders tense. "I know." Silence. A heavy silence, full of everything they didn't want to admit. Finally, he turned around, and what Emery saw on his face was worse than anger or regret. It was resignation. "This can't continue," he said, and each word came out like a stone thrown against her chest. "We knew that from the beginning." Emery swallowed hard, gripping the sheet tightly between her fingers as if that could hold her in place.
"So that was it?" she asked, and hated the vulnerable tone that escaped her own voice. "One night, and that's it?" Ethan closed his eyes for a second, as if fighting against something bigger than himself. "It wasn't just that," he answered, his voice low, almost a whisper. "But I have treatment ahead of me that's going to consume me for months. Chemotherapy, radiation, whatever else the doctors are going to throw at me. And you have a life that doesn't fit into this." He opened his eyes, and for the first time, Emery saw tears beginning to form there. "I'm not going to drag you into my hell. It wouldn't be fair." She got out of bed, wrapped in the sheet, and took 2 steps toward him. "And who said you get to decide that alone?" Her voice came out fervor now, loaded with anger that came from a deep place where pain and love blurred together. "I'm not a child. I know what I'm choosing." Ethan shook his head, eyes red. "No, Emery, you don't know. You don't know what it's like to watch someone waste away. You don't know what it's like to become a burden, an obligation." He took a deep breath, trying to control his emotion. "My mother died of cancer when I was 20. I saw my father turn into a ghost while taking care of her. I saw their love transform into duty, into guilt, into exhaustion. And I'm not going to do that to you." Emery felt her chest tighten. She knew that pain, the pain of caring for someone until there was nothing left of yourself. She'd lived through it with her mother, but she also knew it had been the only thing that had given meaning to the last years of her life. "You think I don't understand?" she said, her voice trembling. "I spent 5 years taking care of my mother, 5 years watching her forget my name, my face, everything. And still, I wouldn't trade that time for anything, because love isn't just about the good days, Ethan. It's about being present on the bad days too." He took a step forward, as if to touch her, but stopped halfway, hands trembling. "I don't want you to see me that way," he said, and his voice broke. "I don't want you to remember me weak, sick, hairless, throwing up after each session. I want you to remember this." He gestured vaguely between them, trying to capture in one moment what they'd shared the night before. This version, the best version. Emery felt tears stream down her face, hot and relentless. "But this version doesn't exist without the others. Nobody is just the best version. We're everything together. And if you don't understand that, then maybe we really shouldn't continue." The words came out like a sentence, final and definitive. Ethan closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, there was acceptance there.
Painful, but present. The drive back to Minneapolis was even quieter than the one out. Ethan drove with his eyes fixed on the road, jaw tense. Emery looked out the window, watching the landscape repeat itself in reverse, as if they were undoing every mile they had traveled together. When he stopped in front of her building, he left the car running, a clear sign that he wasn't going up, wasn't going to say goodbye properly. Emery grabbed her suitcase from the back seat, took a deep breath, and before getting out, turned to him one last time. "Thank you for seeing me," she said, her voice steady despite the tears still shining in her eyes. Even if it was just for one weekend. Ethan nodded, unable to speak. She opened the car door and got out, feeling Minneapolis's cold cut through her like blades. When the car door closed, he waited until he saw her enter the building. Only then did he drive away, taking with him everything they hadn't been able to say.
Emery climbed the stairs to the apartment, each step weighing like lead. She locked the door behind her, let the suitcase drop to the floor, and sat on the old, worn couch, hugging her own knees. The silence of the apartment was deafening. She touched her own pulse with her thumb, that automatic gesture that reminded her she was still alive. But in that moment, alive seemed insufficient because she had tasted something, real connection, genuine affection, love that didn't even need time to form. And now, all of that had been ripped away from her before it even had a chance to bloom. She closed her eyes and let the tears come, knowing that this pain was the price of allowing herself to feel, and that no matter how much it hurt, it was still worth it.
6 months passed like a gray blur. Emery returned to the pet shop routine, to the same frozen streets, to the same silent apartment. But something had changed in her, irreversibly. She was no longer invisible to herself. Ethan had lit a light inside her that, even extinguished now, left permanent marks, like the sun that burns skin and continues to sting even after you leave the beach. She thought about him every day. In the first months, she resisted the temptation to look for him, to know how the treatment was going, if he was alive or… The question never finished. It hung suspended in the air, too heavy to be completed. She moved forward because it was what she knew how to do, survive. But survival now tasted bitter, like cold coffee forgotten on the table. And then, on a rainy May afternoon, the phone rang. An unknown number. Emery almost didn't answer, but something made her press the green button. Hello? The voice on the other end was feminine, polite but loaded with urgency. Emery Lawson? She felt her stomach turn. Yes, that's me. There was a brief pause, as if the person was choosing their words carefully. My name is Olivia Marshall, Ethan's sister. Emery's heart stopped, literally stopped, and then raced in a chaotic rhythm she couldn't control. He asked me to call you. Emery sat slowly on the edge of the bed, legs trembling. Is he okay? The question came out desperate, childish. Olivia took a deep breath. No, he's hospitalized. The treatment didn't work as we hoped. The doctors say it's a matter of weeks. The world collapsed. Emery felt the phone slip from her hand but managed to catch it at the last second. He wants to see you, Olivia continued, her voice breaking. He talks about you every day. I didn't know you two were so close.
Emery doesn't remember how she responded, how she hung up the phone, how she managed to get up and grab her purse. Everything became automatic movement, catching the bus, crossing the city, arriving at the hospital, asking for his room at reception. Each step felt unreal, as if she were floating outside her own body. When she finally stopped in front of the door to room 304, she hesitated.
because opening that door meant facing the reality she'd tried to ignore for 6 whole months, that Ethan was dying, and that she loved him in a deep, frightening, undeniable way. Loved him without having had enough time, without having said the right words, without building enough memories. But love doesn't ask permission. It doesn't wait for the right moment. It just exists. And it hurts. God, how it hurts. She took a deep breath, touched her own pulse to remind herself she was alive, and opened the door. Ethan was lying in the hospital bed, thinner than she remembered, his pale face contrasting with the white sheets. But when he saw her, his eyes lit up, that same light she'd seen the first time he walked into the pet shop. He smiled, weak but genuine, and reached his hand toward her. "You came," he said, his voice hoarse but full of relief. Emery crossed the room in 3 quick steps, took his hand and squeezed it hard, as if she could hold him in this world just with the strength of her touch. "Of course I came," she whispered, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I would always come." Ethan closed his eyes for a second, as if absorbing those words, storing them somewhere safe inside him. When he opened his eyes again, there were tears there. "I'm sorry," he said, "for pushing you away, for thinking I was protecting you when really I was just scared."
"Scared of what?" Emery asked, though she already knew the answer. "Scared of loving you and leaving you," he answered, his voice breaking. "Scared that you'd remember me like this, weak, sick, dying. Scared that what we had wouldn't be enough to make up for the pain I was going to cause." Emery shook her head, tears flowing freely now. "You don't understand, Ethan. I spent 6 months trying to forget you. 6 months pretending that weekend didn't mean anything. And you know what I discovered? That I'd rather have you like this for a few weeks than never have you at all." She held his face with both hands, forcing him to look into her eyes. "I love you. And it doesn't matter how much time we have. I love you." The words came out raw, desperate, true. Ethan closed his eyes and let the tears fall, pulling her into a tight embrace, as if he wanted to merge the two of them into one. The next days were a strange mixture of pain and fullness. Emery spent every afternoon by his side, talking about everything and nothing. They talked about childhood, about dreams they never fulfilled, about places they wished they'd visited together. Ethan told her about the day he decided to walk into that pet shop for the first time, admitting it wasn't by chance. He'd seen her through the window, alone, organizing shelves, and something about her made him stop. "You looked so complete in your solitude," he said, smiling weakly, "like you didn't need anyone. And that attracted me because I also pretended not to need anyone." Emery laughed, a laugh wet with tears. "We really fooled ourselves, didn't we?" He agreed, squeezing her hand. "We fooled ourselves, but in the end, we found each other." And in that moment, despite everything, despite the imminent death, despite the stolen time, despite the pain, they were together, and that had to be enough.
On the last night, Ethan was weaker, breathing difficult, words coming out slowly. Emery held his hand, humming softly a song her mother used to sing when she was a child. He opened his eyes and looked at her with an intensity that made her stop singing. "Thank you," he whispered, "for making me feel alive when I'd already given up." Emery felt her chest shatter. "Thank you for seeing me," she answered, her voice choked, "for reminding me that I exist." He smiled, that tired smile but full of peace, and closed his eyes for the last time. Emery stayed there, holding his hand until she felt his pulse stop, until his chest no longer rose, until the nurse came in and touched her shoulder gently. She didn't cry in that moment. She just kissed his forehead, whispered a final, "I love you," and left the room. Because some goodbyes are silent, and some pains are too big to fit into tears.
3 days after the funeral, Emery received a thick envelope in the mail. She recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Olivia's. Inside, a carefully folded letter and something heavier wrapped in tissue paper. Emery sat on the couch, hands trembling as she opened the envelope. Olivia's letter was brief but kind. "Ethan asked me to give you this when the time came. He wrote it in his last days, between pain sessions. He said you would understand. Thank you for being by his side at the end. You were what he wanted most, even when he thought he didn't deserve it." Emery folded Olivia's letter and picked up the other envelope, smaller, with her name written in Ethan's shaky handwriting. She took a deep breath, touched her own pulse with her thumb, that gesture that anchored her, and opened it. His words waited for her, as if you were still there, whispering in her ear. "Emery, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't tell you everything I wanted to while I was still alive, so let me try now. You came into my life when I'd already given up. Not on living, but on feeling. I'd accepted that I was going to die alone, surrounded by people, but completely alone. And then you appeared, invisible to everyone except to me. You saw me, and that changed everything." Emery felt tears begin to fall, wetting the paper. She continued reading, each word piercing her chest like a delicate needle. "I know I pushed you away. I know I tried to protect you from myself, but you came back. And in the final days, when everything hurt too much to pretend, you stayed. You held my hand. You sang to me. You made me feel loved until the last second. And that's more than most people have in an entire lifetime."
The letter continued, and Emery had to stop several times to wipe her eyes to be able to see the words. There's a check with this letter. It's not payment. It never was. It's a request. Use this to live, Emery, not just survive. Travel, study, get therapy if you need to, buy a place of your own, adopt a dog, whatever. But please don't let my death make you give up on yourself, because you deserve everything. You deserve to be seen. You deserve to be loved. You deserve to take up space in the world. Emery sobbed loudly, hugging the letter against her chest. She could hear his voice saying those words, could see the tired but sincere smile. "I loved you, Emery, loved you with everything that was still left in me. And if there's something after this, I'll keep loving you. Thank you for being my light at the end. Now go and be your own light." From Ethan. Inside the envelope was a check for $50,000 and a photo. Emery picked up the photo with trembling hands and felt her heart squeeze. It was of the two of them at the wedding, a photo she didn't even know existed. Ethan was looking at her with that smile that was only hers, and Emery was laughing at something he'd said, eyes shining in a way she hadn't seen herself in years. They looked happy, complete, real. She touched his face in the photo, wishing she could go back to that moment, to that weekend when everything was still possible. But she knew she couldn't. Time only moves forward. And she needed to move forward too. Not because the pain had passed, because it hadn't, but because he had asked, because he believed in her. And maybe it was time for her to believe too. She placed the photo in a simple frame and left it on the nightstand, where she could see it every morning. Not as a reminder of death, but of rebirth.
The first months were difficult. Emery continued working at the pet shop, but started looking for something more. She made an appointment with a therapist, something she'd put off for years. In the sessions, she talked about her mother, about Ethan, about the guilt she carried like a backpack that was too heavy. And gradually, session after session, she began to unpack that weight. The therapist helped her understand that love and loss go together, that feeling pain meant she'd loved truly, and that this was a gift, not a curse. Emery also used part of the money to take an online business administration course, something she'd always wanted but never thought she deserved. And for the first time in years, she had plans. Small, fragile, but plans.
like a little plant beginning to sprout in barren soil. She also adopted a cat, an orange stray that showed up at the pet shop one day, thin and frightened, as if it had given up on trusting people. Emery picked it up, and the cat curled against her, purring softly. "We understand each other, don't we?" she whispered. She took him home and named him Ethan, not to replace, not to forget, but to honor, because Ethan the man had come into her life and taught her that connection was possible, that love could exist even amidst pain, that she deserved to take up space in the world. And the cat, with his yellow eyes and constant purring, reminded her every day that she wasn't alone anymore. Not completely, because those who truly love never disappear completely. They stay there, at the edges, in the memories, in the small gestures we carry without realizing it. 6 months after Ethan's death, Emery was different. Not healed, because some wounds never close completely, but alive. She still touched her own pulse when she got nervous, but now she did it less often. She smiled more. She talked with the pet shop customers, not just with mechanical efficiency, but with genuine interest. She became friends with Sarah, the coworker who'd always been distant, and started attending a reading group on Saturdays. Small changes, but meaningful. Because for the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving, she was living. And every morning, upon waking, she looked at his photo on the nightstand and whispered softly, "Thank you." Because Ethan had left, yes, but his love had stayed, and it had transformed everything, including her. And maybe, in the end, that was exactly what love should do. Not tie us to the past, but give us courage to move forward, with scars, but also with wings. The story of Emery and Ethan teaches us something profound about the nature of love. It doesn't need to last forever to be real, and it doesn't need to be perfect to transform. Just as she discovered that love can change everything, even amid loss, even in the face of death, each of us also carries that power of transformation within ourselves. True love isn't measured in years, but in intensity, in presence, in the courage to give yourself even when you know it might hurt. Emery started out invisible, living in survival mode, carrying guilt that wasn't hers. Ethan walked into her life as a hurried stranger looking for cat food for a cat that didn't even exist, and within weeks, they became home for each other. That safe place where masks fall and truth can finally breathe. He taught her that she deserved to be seen. She taught him that living isn't about how much time we have, but about how we use every second. And together, even for such a short time, they proved that real connections can happen in the most unlikely places, in the most unexpected moments. Stories like this remind us that it's never too late to start over and believe in love, that the pain of loss doesn't cancel out the beauty of what was lived, that carrying scars doesn't make us broken, but human, and that sometimes people come into our lives not to stay forever, but to show us who we can become. Emery didn't forget Ethan. She didn't get over the loss as if it were possible to erase what they felt. But she learned to carry his love like an inner light, something that warms her, that guides her, that reminds her she's worthy of taking up space in the world. If this story touched you in any way, if it awakened memories, reflections, or emotions that were stored away, write in the comments, "Love transforms lives." Leave your mark here. Share it with someone who needs to hear that there's still hope, that there's still time, that there's still love waiting to be discovered. Because every story we share connects us to each other, reminds us that we're not alone in this journey of feeling, losing, and finding again. Subscribe to Eternal Romance Stories and experience, with each episode, emotions that warm the soul and reflections that transform the heart.
Here you'll find stories that go beyond entertainment, stories that touch deeply, that make you pause and reflect on your own life, on the people you love, on the chances you still have to live with more passion, more truth, more courage. Don't let these stories go unnoticed. Allow yourself to feel. Allow yourself to believe. And this was just one of the many stories that will still move you here. In the next episodes, you'll meet other characters, other journeys, other ways of loving and transforming. Each story is an open door to a new world, to a different emotion, to a lesson you might need to hear right now. So, stay with us, because love, in all its forms, intense, quiet, brief, eternal, always has something to teach us, and we'll be here telling these stories, one after another, until you remember that you too deserve your own love story.